Appreciate your thoughts on theodicy as well. And if I can recommend to you that you Google, as well as the problem of evil, which is theodicy, Google something called the problem of beauty. That's the counteraction to the problem of evil. And it states, if there is no God, there should be no beauty in our world. And yet, we see beauty everywhere that we go. So thank you for having me. I'm travelling solo today. My wife and my daughter tend to stick where they can go consistently instead of traipsing across the state with me. That's okay. I do miss them occasionally, but I do travel quite a lot, and I don't blame them for wanting to stay where they are. I've been in Victoria for quite a number of years now. Some of you probably know me. I've spent time ministering in Ararat, Hamilton and Stawell, and Wanturna Church, and I was a chaplain at Nunawading Christian College. I've done time at West Point. I've worked at Plenty Valley and at North Point churches as well. But perhaps you've never seen me before in your life, and you think, well, I've never seen him before. At big camps, I'm usually in charge of the upper primary kids, 8 and 9-year-olds. That's my forte, because I still have yet to grow up, and I'm enjoying it. Did you hear about big camp, by the way? I'm not sure if you've heard the latest. So we received the news at the conference that the government has actually seconded the Elmore campground for those who are now homeless because of the floods. And pretty much it made big camp at Elmore impossible. So they've just decided for next year, to have it at Lardner Park again. So there you go, fresh news, hot off the press. Lardner Park is probably not ideal, but we would rather have a camp at a not ideal place than miss out on a 5th year of camp. What do you think? So hopefully that's encouraged you and cheered you up this morning. I have been here a couple of times before, but I've never preached here. And as I've been going around to different churches, I want to get to know you, and I want to introduce myself a little. So thank you, Darcy, for that. But I want to share a little bit about my story today. But because I'm not so egotistical as to think you want to listen to stories about me for half an hour, I also want to look into a Bible story of one of my biggest heroes. And if I was to ask you, who's the hero of yours from the Bible, who would you say? Jesus? Yeah, anyone else? Moses? I heard a few there. Job? I don't hear many people saying Job. That's an interesting one. Joseph, yeah. Most people say Daniel. Or David, Samuel, Samson. He's a good one too, isn't he? But for me, it's this guy, Bartimaeus. You may not know the story of Bartimaeus, but we're going to look at it today in Mark 10. If you've got your Bibles, you can come with me to Mark 10. I'll have the Bible verses up on the screen for you. So if you didn't bring your Bible today, that's okay. You'll be able to see them. But if you want to follow along in your own Bible, please, you're welcome to open it up to Mark 10, and the story starts in Jericho. And I've been over to the Middle East. I've been privileged to go on one of those Holy Lands tours. It is hot over there. And so our story today in Jericho starts on a day that's hot, and hot only in a way that the Holy Lands can really be. If you're lucky, there's a slight breeze that might cool you, and on that breeze you might smell the scent of the date palms that are the only kind of plants that are growing nearby at Jericho. And on this day, a man sits by the side of the road in Jericho begging. And although he's not a proud man, he is wise, because today there are many people on the road travelling to Jerusalem for Passover. It's the perfect time to beg. This is when you're going to encounter the most amount of people on the road. And it's good that this man is not proud, because begging is about as low as you can go in his society. That probably hasn't changed much, has it? People who were blind particularly were seen to be cursed by God, shunned and outcast. And this man is blind, and he sits by the side of the road begging. We're going to start in verse 46 of Mark 10. And with any luck, this will even work. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. And that's all we learn about him from the first verse. Bartimaeus means son of Timaeus, Bar meaning son of. And he was begging by the side of the road. And, before I found God and got to know him, that's really how I was as well. I was a beggar. I just didn't know it. I grew up in a town called Broken Hill. Has anyone ever been to Broken Hill? Oh, look at you all. God bless you. I like to call Broken Hill a nice town to visit. And I do go back occasionally, but it is a difficult town to grow up in. I was raised in the Catholic Church, and I was a good altar boy. And you can see me there on the left. I'm told that white shorts are back in fashion again. I didn't expect that to happen, but there I am looking fashionable. My dad's still hanging on to his 70s glad rags. Mum in the 80s velour jumpsuit, and my brother being cheeky as always. That's my family. So we grew up in Broken Hill, which is pretty hot too, I'll be honest. And the Catholic Church there was the spiritual centre for me. I was, going to Catholic schools, and I was an altar boy here, a faithful Sunday church goer. And, my mother was very pleased with me because I even thought about becoming a priest. And there was a time there when I seriously considered it. It was before I discovered girls, but there was a time. And my mother really wanted me to become a priest because according to Catholic tradition, so she says, the mother of a priest automatically gets into heaven. Can you imagine that? I'm not sure if it's the same for the mothers of pastors. As I got older, I lost interest in church though, because it just stopped being relevant to me, and Mum used to make me go. But the guy up the front didn't seem to say much that appealed to me. He spoke in abstractions that I didn't understand, and I lost interest, and I couldn't wait to leave home. Because I thought, right, once I leave home, I can stop going to church and do what I like. And that's what I did. I moved to Canberra for university. And I attended Australian National University, and I studied many things. I didn't actually graduate because I was having too much fun living my own life. But as soon as I left home and went there, I stopped going to church. And I would visit Broken Hill, and I would go to church with Mum to make her happy. Keep up the pretense so that she would think that she's a good parent. But every minute at church seemed to go on forever. If you can imagine, the Mass went for 40 whole minutes. And I had to sit there for 40 minutes. Can you imagine that? So long, right? I would spend the time counting the number of wooden beams in the roof just to pass the time. It went on for an eternity. I wanted to allow my own heart to determine my life. I knew God was there. I'd always had a sense of God in my life, but he was far away. He was in the little tabernacle in the church. I don't know if you know this in Catholic churches. There's a little box where they keep the Eucharist, which is the bread, and they put it in there because they've done this ritual that they believe makes it the actual flesh of God. They keep it in this special little tent called the tabernacle. I call it God in the box. That's where God was kept. So when I was outside of a church, I didn't have to worry about God because God lived in the church. And so I knew God was there in some weird, far-away place. So I hatched a plan. I thought, right, I'm just going to live the life that I want. And then, when I get old, on my deathbed, confess everything, slip right into heaven. And that was my teenage brain coming up with the plan to get the best of both worlds. Good plan or not? No, it's not, is it? Not a great plan. We had this uneasy truce, and I thought, well, I'll just live the life as I wanted to. In reality, I didn't know Jesus. I'd never really met Jesus. I didn't know God. He was a faraway, distant, angry figure. And religion was just about being told to do things that you didn't want to do. And I thought, if I ignored all that, then surely I would be happy in my life, right? If I did whatever I liked, I would get more happiness. You think that happened? You're smart here in Geelong, I can tell. It just didn't happen. At university, the more I tried to get a kick out of life and find joy and find happiness, the harder I failed. And don't get me wrong, I had friends, I had things to do, but something was missing, and every time I'd come home from a night out, I'd say, is that it? Is that really it? Is that everything that this life has to offer? And I felt empty inside. The more I sought pleasure and joy or love, the hollower I got. And I realise now that, like Bartimaeus, I was begging by the roadside of life, not moving forward, sitting still, looking for scraps of joy and happiness while sitting in a desert. I was blind to my condition. At least Bartimaeus knows he's blind though, right? And he's done something about it. To survive, Bartimaeus has to ask strangers for a pittance, to rely on their kindness. Only this day is different. This day in Jericho, as the crowd moves along the roadway to Jerusalem, something is about to happen. Because down the road through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem is Jesus. The next day after this event in Jericho, Jesus would ride on a donkey triumphantly into Jerusalem, being hailed as the king, with palm fronds being waved. In 3 days from this event in Jericho, his head would be anointed with expensive oil in Simon's house. In 5 days from this event in Jericho, Jesus would sit and eat one final meal with his disciples. And 6 days from this moment in Jericho, his lifeless body would hang on a cross outside of the city gates of Jerusalem. But right now, he's moving with the throng, with his disciples and hangers-on to Jerusalem. Let's see what happens. When he, that is Bartimaeus, heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Now, this really strikes me. I don't know about you, but Bartimaeus is sitting by the side of the road, and we can tell that his hearing must be good, because the people in the crowd must be talking about Jesus. Someone must have said, "Oh, we're walking with Jesus. There's Jesus over there with his disciples." And Bartimaeus hears that Jesus is walking past. You can't see him, but he gets excited. He's heard about Jesus. This is the man who for the last 3.5 years has been healing people all over Israel. The lame have walked again. Even the dead have risen again. But most importantly to Bartimaeus, what's happened? The blind can see again, right? And he hears this man is walking past his road right now. What does he do? Does he sit still and sit quiet? No way. He jumps up. "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And in his desperation, in his pain, he just cries out into the darkness, not even sure if Jesus was there or if he could be heard. His last hope. But what happens to him, though, when he cries out his last hope? Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. Who are the ones rebuking Bartimaeus? It's the people walking along the road on the way to Jerusalem with Jesus, isn't it? It could even be the followers of Jesus, the disciples of Jesus. Why are they rebuking Bartimaeus? We can really only speculate, but I wonder if they just didn't want some lowly beggar disturbing the master. Was he embarrassing himself in front of a crowd? You ever been embarrassed with someone else when they're making a fool of themselves? Maybe they're just like, shush. Were beggars below their notice, perhaps? Do you remember the question his disciples asked Jesus about a different blind man? Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? What's their attitude towards blind beggars? They're sinners. Don't disturb the master. But does the rebuke deter Bartimaeus? No. He shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And it doesn't deter him because he knows his scriptures, right? And you'll notice that he calls him this title, Son of David, because he knows Isaiah 9. He, and that's speaking in prophecy of the Messiah, he will reign on David's throne. He knows the Messiah will be an heir of David. And so by calling Jesus Son of David, what is he declaring? He's declaring that he is the promised Messiah. This is something even his disciples aren't sure about. But Bartimaeus is showing an incredible amount of faith for a blind man who can't even see the man in front of him. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. He's read what will happen in Isaiah 35. Then will the eyes of the blind be opened. That's the promise he's clinging to, isn't it? So we know Bartimaeus knows Isaiah at least. He's acknowledging that Jesus is the one to come, the promised one of Isaiah 9, who would heal the blind. And so he cries out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. What happens next? This is incredible. Please pay attention to this. Jesus stopped and said, call him. So they called to the blind man, cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you. Because this is incredible. In the middle of this crowded roadway, with people either side streaming to Jerusalem, Jesus hears the cries of Bartimaeus and stops. You ever tried stopping in the middle of a pavement or a sidewalk or in the middle of the mall somewhere, just stopping? What happens? People pile up behind you, they get cranky. Get out of the way. Jesus stops. Jesus hears and stands still. The cries of a beggar have stopped the King of the universe in his tracks as he walks to Jerusalem to fulfill so much. He stops. I don't know that I would have had the courage to call out to God like that. Certainly not in the beggarly state that I was in. Would you? Would you be happy to call out in front of strangers your faith in God? For me, God was in heaven and a nice, safe distance away. I didn't want to talk about him. I just knew he was there. And by this time, I'd moved to Adelaide. Surely some of you have been to Adelaide. Who recognises this picture? Rundle Mall, right? The centre of Adelaide. This is where people meet, at the giant silver balls. I had a good job, good friends, but I was still hollow. One day I was walking through Brundle Mall. I saw a Christian bookstore. I thought, all right, I'll get a Bible. So I walked inside, I picked up the first Bible I saw and bought it. It was the Contemporary English version. I didn't know what that meant. And I took it home. I thought, okay, I've got a Bible. And this will make me happy, right? I'm connected with God now because I own a Bible. And so I would lay in bed and I would put it on the dresser and I would go to sleep with my hand on it, hoping that somehow, magically, I would be fixed, that I would be happy, that I would know God because I had this. I didn't open it. I didn't bother reading it. I was like a guy dehydrated in the desert with a bottle of water but not opening it, right? Crazy. To look at it now, it's crazy. But I was just searching. I was crying out. I needed something. I just didn't know what it was. I moved to Sydney after Adelaide, and I worked for a company called NCR, National Cash Registers. And I met a wonderful woman there, and life got a little better. She was kind of like me. She'd stepped away from church. She'd been disillusioned after her father had gone into ministry. But we got on really well. It turned out she was something called a Seventh-day Adventist. I didn't know what that was. I'd never heard of it before. But she had this connection with God that I didn't have. And I kind of wanted that. I was kind of jealous of it. And so, we had an uneasy truce within God. And my wife and I, we wouldn't talk much about religion. She knew I was Catholic, and I declared it. I'm Catholic. I was born Catholic. You can't change me. I know you're laughing now because here I am preaching at an Adventist church. You know what's going to happen. But I said to her, this is just who I am. You can't change me. Don't bother trying. She said, no, I won't. No, of course not. She didn't. And she didn't. Although one day she just said, the seventh day of the week is Saturday, right? And I said, no, don't be silly. In my calendar, look, it's got the red. It's the Sunday is the last. It was a Catholic calendar. Sunday is She said, no, check the dictionary. And for me, the dictionary was like the second most important book in the home when I grew up. So I looked up Saturday. Sure enough, it said seventh day of the week. You're going to laugh at this, but for me, that brought everything crashing down for me. I had a plan predicated on my understanding of God and Christianity. But if I had something so simple, so wrong, then everything else must be wrong as well. And it really threw me. My whole recant on my deathbed plan went out the window. And I didn't know what to do. I needed to find out more. And so around this time we came home and we found a flyer in our letterbox. It had 3 angels on the front. And my girlfriend said, I know who this is from. And it was for Net 99 at Parramatta Church. So we attended. And I listened to it and I'm like, it's all fine and, But I didn't see Jesus there. I didn't meet Jesus. It was nice information and I agreed with a lot of it. But something was holding me back, I guess. I saw the doctrines, but I didn't see Jesus. We moved to Queensland because we couldn't afford to buy a house in Sydney. And my girlfriend, Vanessa, wanted to go back to church. As it happened, we had bought a house in a suburb that had a Seventh-day Adventist church. Pure coincidence, right? Just sheer chance. When I think about it now, I think, hold on. And so I said, look, there's no point. I'm always going to be Catholic. Don't bother. And she said, no, just come sit with me. I want someone to sit with me at church. That's all I want. I said, fine, we'll go. But I'm not going for this. 3 hours? Are you kidding me? 40 minutes was too long. I'm not going to go for 3 hours. She said, just come for the main service. All right, fine. So we walked up to the door of this church, and this big Maori guy came at me. I thought he was the bouncer. He must have been able to tell, right, that I didn't belong there. But instead, he hugged me and said, welcome, brother. I'm like, who is this guy? We walked inside and we sat down, and the people in front of us turned around and said, hey, welcome. We want to invite you to dinner tonight. Come and eat with us. We're going to have a hangi. I'm like, what's a hangi? They said, you'll find out. And so it was great. I'm like, these seem like actual decent people. And then the head elder got up and he preached about the evils of the Catholic Church. My girlfriend's sitting there going red. She's like, I'm never getting him back in church again, And to put a fine point on it, they were the church folk rebuking Bartimaeus, right? It might have been true. Maybe Bartimaeus was a sinner. But he wanted Jesus and they wanted to rebuke him. So when I was in that church, I wanted Jesus. Instead, I got a rebuke. The only thing that kept me there was that for the first time, I'd maybe seen Jesus in the people around me, because they had shown the love and care of him to me. It's a hard lesson to learn. Sometimes we are the ones keeping people away from Jesus. With all the best intentions of the world, by showing them doctrines and rebuking, we might be driving away people who are earnestly crying out for Jesus. And I guess when we look at what Jesus did for Bartimaeus, it informs us a little about how to act today, because Jesus stopped. Look what happens next. Jesus stopped and said, call him. So they called to the blind man, cheer up, on your feet. He's calling you. Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." There's a few things here that really jump out at me. Did Jesus walk over to where Bartimaeus was? No. Did Jesus call out to Bartimaeus directly? No. He spoke to those around him and said, "Call him." Catch that, that's important. Jesus could have done either of those things, but he's saying to those who have just rebuked Bartimaeus, "Call him here." And so the people who are just rebuking Bartimaeus saying, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." What a message for the church today, right? Wouldn't it be great if that was our message? Cheer up, this world is hard, but be of good cheer. Get on your feet to move forward. Jesus is calling you. Fantastic. He gets the people around him to bring Bartimaeus to him. That's the church. That's us. That's our job, folks, to bring people to Jesus, isn't it? That's what we do. He asked those who were just rebuking to call the beggar instead, and they are eager for him to come. And so they say, "He's calling you." Now, obviously, the guy's blind. He needs a hand to Jesus. So he has to get shown to Jesus. But I want to point out what he does first. He throws his cloak aside. Now, this might just sound like a dramatic ta-da moment, right? But for a beggar, his cloak is just about his most valuable piece of clothing. It sheltered him against the elements when he was outside begging. He put it out in front of him to gather alms. So in fact, what he's showing by throwing this cloak away is that he has faith that he won't need it anymore. He's saying, "I'm not going to be a beggar after this because Jesus has called me. I don't need this anymore." Before any healing has happened, before anything has even changed, he has faith in Jesus. You start to see why Bartimaeus is my hero, right? Because I want this faith. He's had the faith to call out to the Messiah and acknowledge that he's the Messiah in front of a crowd. He's had the faith to throw aside his cloak. He doesn't need it anymore. And lastly, when Jesus says to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" What a question. Does Jesus know what he wants? Right, why does he ask him? I used to ponder about this. And then I guess I realised one day, it was recently my wife and I, it was our 20th anniversary. We've been married for 20 years. And if I was to say to her, "My darling, what would you like for an anniversary gift?" Would she say, if she said something like, "Justin, I want you to pluck the moon from the night sky, put it on a silver chain and hang it around my neck," what would I say to that? I can't do that, right? She knows well enough to ask only what I can give her, right? So Jesus is saying, "What do you think I can do for you? What do you have faith that I can do for you?" And Bartimaeus says, "Rabbi, I want to see." He's saying, "I know you can heal me. I have faith that I will be able to see because of who you are." You understand? And that really challenges me with my prayers. Do I pray small prayers? How much do I show God that I believe he can do by my prayers? Do I catch myself praying for grace and for nice travelling mercies and little things? Or do I pray for big things? Change our country. Bring peace to the world, Lord. Help us to change Geelong and have a huge impact on this city today. What are our big prayers? What does our faith reflect that we believe God can do for us? In an instant, "Go," said Jesus, your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight. And what's his response? And followed Jesus along the road. Did he sit back down and start begging? No, he followed Jesus. Can you imagine this? The first sight you have is the smiling face of your Saviour. What an incredible moment that must have been for Bartimaeus. And I think when we truly see the face of Jesus as well, when we truly see it, we'll want to follow him too. Well, the pastor at the church that me and my girlfriend were going to started doing Bible studies. For 2 years he studied with me. 2 long years, and I held out because I didn't want to be a half-hearted Christian. I'd been one of those nearly all my life. If I was going to commit, it had to be all the way. And although I was more and more convinced of what he was saying, I still didn't commit. One day driving to prayer meeting, I had a car accident. And I'm not saying that God spared me or anything, but I came out of this car that was wrecked and written off without a scratch. And it just made me realise that I don't have a lot of time. I have to make a decision. I can't keep sitting on the fence hoping that I can have the best of both worlds, because there's nothing in that begging world for me. And so finally, after so long, I made a commitment. I saw the face of Jesus and I saw that he really wanted to save me with all my flaws. And I wasn't perfect. I'm still not perfect. I know that'll shock you. But we get that wrong, don't we? We wait to be perfect before we come in, but instead our message should be, hey, be of good cheer. Come. Jesus has called you. And so I finally gave in and I committed to Jesus in my heart and I started following him down that road. I got baptized and I married the girl, of course. And then something amazing happened. That hollowness inside was quietly filled. It wasn't a big dramatic moment. Just every week, worshipping God, meeting with the community that I'd become a part of. I found that going to church was no longer a burden or a chore. 3 hours flew by like that. And we would stay all afternoon. We'd have lunch and we'd spend all day together. And it was a joy. And I would have this sense, this light happiness from Sabbath that I'd never had before. And since then, I've kept following Jesus down the road. He's led me on an amazing adventure. He saw me go to Avondale to study ministry. He's seen me and my wife, Vanessa, have a child who is growing quickly. Obviously, I went through the Holy Lands with a bunch of people there. I've been to Vanuatu on mission trips. And of course, I've had the real privilege of being able to baptize many people into the kingdom of God and say, cheer up, Jesus has called you. It's a real joy. I'm so thankful to God for that. And I'm still following Jesus down the road. But let me tell you, sometimes it's tempting to sit back down, It's not always easy walking on that road, is it? And so that's, I guess, my final challenge for you today. I want to ask you, where are you on the roadway of faith? Are you still following Jesus? Are you perhaps maybe here for only the first or second or third time and you're sitting by the side of the road of life begging? Maybe that's still where you are right now. But if you're here, maybe there's something in you that wants to cry out to Jesus. Or have you been walking down the roadway, but then you've sort of stopped and sat down and you've looked at some of the scraps from that old life longingly and you want to go back to it? It's an easy temptation to give into. Maybe you haven't thrown away your beggar's cloak yet or started to walk towards Jesus. But wherever you are on this roadway, I want to encourage you with one thing. Jesus stopped for Bartimaeus when he cried out. If you call out to him, he will hear you and he will stop for you as well. Thank you.